Marcus Valdez pushed the mop bucket down the gleaming corridor of Ramstein Air Base, the familiar squeak of the wheels echoing off the polished floors. At 52, he had been cleaning these same hallways for nearly 8 years, invisible to most of the airmen who hurried past in their pressed uniforms. The early morning shift suited him perfectly. Fewer people meant fewer questions about the quiet janitor who somehow knew the difference between an F-16 Fighting Falcon and an F-15 Eagle just by their engine signatures. As he worked, Marcus listened to the distant rumble of aircraft engines warming up on the tarmac. His weathered hands gripped the mop handle a little tighter when he heard the distinctive whine of jet turbines spooling up. Most people heard noise. Marcus heard a symphony he once conducted from 30,000 feet above enemy territory. But those days were buried deep, along with the call sign that once struck fear in hostile pilots across 3 different conflicts. The alarm system pierced through the morning quiet like a dagger. Marcus dropped his mop as red warning lights bathed the corridor in crimson shadows. Over the intercom, Colonel Harrison's voice crackled with urgency. Unidentified aircraft approaching from the east, he announced. All personnel to emergency stations. Marcus watched young airmen sprint past him toward their assignments, their faces tight with controlled fear. He had seen that look before in the eyes of his own wingmen decades ago when enemy MiGs appeared on radar screens. The base transformation was swift and brutal. Within minutes, the peaceful morning routine had become a coordinated dance of military precision. Through the reinforced windows, Marcus could see ground crews scrambling to prepare the squadron's F-22 Raptors. His trained eye counted only 6 aircraft being prepped for launch. Against an unknown number of hostiles, it might not be enough. The familiar ache in his chest returned, the one that came whenever he heard the call to battle but could no longer answer. Marcus abandoned his cleaning cart and moved toward the command center, his custodial uniform granting him access to areas most civilians couldn't enter. Through the reinforced glass of the operations room, he watched radar operators track multiple bogies closing fast on the base perimeter. 12 hostiles confirmed, Lieutenant Chun reported to Colonel Harrison. ETA 4 minutes. The colonel's jaw tightened as he studied the tactical display. Our birds won't be airborne in time, he muttered. Ground defenses only. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as memories of aerial combat flooded back unbidden. He knew those radar signatures, the attack formation, the approach vector. These weren't random raiders. This was a coordinated strike by pilots who understood American defensive capabilities. Outside, the 6 Raptors were still undergoing pre-flight checks, their pilots not yet even strapped into cockpit harnesses. The mathematics were brutal and simple. 12 enemy fighters against ground-based missiles and anti-aircraft guns. The base's survival would depend on luck more than skill, and Marcus had learned long ago that luck was a fickle companion in aerial warfare. The first missile impacts shook the building like an earthquake. Marcus steadied himself against the wall as emergency lighting flickered throughout the corridor. Through the chaos, he heard Colonel Harrison barking orders over the communication system. SAM batteries engaging, the colonel announced. All non-essential personnel to hardened shelters. Marcus ignored the evacuation protocol and pressed closer to the operations center. On the tactical screens, he could see the enemy aircraft breaking into attack formations, their movements precise and deadly. These weren't amateurs flying stolen jets. These were professional military pilots executing a textbook combined arms assault. Another explosion rocked the base as hostile missiles found their targets. The runway lights went dark, and Marcus felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. Even if the Raptors could get airborne now, they would be launching blind into a coordinated ambush. He watched helplessly as red icons on the radar screen multiplied, representing incoming ordnance that would cripple the base's defensive capabilities within minutes. His hands clenched into fists, muscle memory from decades of gripping control sticks during combat missions. The base's surface-to-air missile batteries erupted in coordinated volleys, their contrails painting white streaks across the dawn sky. Marcus watched through the operations center window as 2 enemy aircraft exploded in brilliant orange fireballs, but 10 more pressed their attack with ruthless precision. The remaining hostiles had adapted their approach, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures that spoke of advanced military training. Colonel Harrison's voice carried desperate urgency now. "Runway is compromised," he reported. "Primary fuel depot hit. Secondary explosions imminent." Marcus saw the tactical picture with crystalline clarity that came from years of aerial combat. The enemy wasn't trying to occupy the base. They were systematically destroying its ability to launch aircraft or coordinate regional air defense. This was a strategic decapitation strike designed to blind American forces across the entire sector. On the tarmac, ground crews frantically tried to taxi the Raptors to emergency positions, but burning fuel and debris made movement nearly impossible. The mathematics of aerial warfare were inexorable. Without immediate intervention, this base would be eliminated as an effective military asset within the next 10 minutes. Through the smoke and chaos, Marcus spotted something that made his blood freeze. A single F-16 Fighting Falcon sat isolated on the far end of the tarmac, apparently forgotten in the evacuation scramble. The aircraft looked operational, its canopy closed and external systems powered down for routine maintenance. Most people would see an abandoned piece of military hardware. Marcus saw salvation. His feet carried him toward the emergency exit before his conscious mind made the decision. Behind him, Colonel Harrison was coordinating the final defensive positions as the last SAM battery went offline. "We're down to small arms and prayer," the colonel announced grimly. Marcus pushed through the exit door into the acrid smoke outside. The enemy fighters were regrouping for what appeared to be a final bombing run designed to eliminate any remaining operational aircraft. His janitor's uniform felt like a costume now, a disguise he had worn for 8 years to hide from a past that suddenly demanded his attention. The F-16 waited 200 meters across open ground littered with burning debris and unexploded ordnance. Getting there would require luck. Flying it would require skills he hadn't used in over a decade. Marcus sprinted across the debris-strewn tarmac as enemy jets screamed overhead in their final attack formation. Shrapnel whistled past his head, and burning fuel created a maze of fire that he navigated with the tactical awareness of a combat veteran. His janitor's uniform was torn and blackened by the time he reached the F-16, but his hands moved with absolute certainty as he performed the emergency startup sequence. The aircraft systems responded to his touch like an old friend recognizing a familiar voice. Above him, the hostile formation was beginning their terminal dive, weapons armed and target locks established on the remaining ground installations. Marcus felt the fighters' engines spool to life beneath him, their familiar vibration awakening muscle memories buried for years. The heads-up display flickered to life, painting targeting data across his field of vision. He had perhaps 90 seconds before the enemy completed their bombing run and eliminated every remaining asset on the base. The mathematics were simple now. 12 enemy fighters versus one forgotten janitor in a decades-old F-16. But mathematics had never accounted for the fury of a guardian angel who had finally stopped pretending to be human. The F-16 roared to life as Marcus engaged full afterburners, launching from the damaged runway like a phoenix rising from burning wreckage. The enemy formation leader noticed the unexpected takeoff just as Marcus achieved wheel sup, and the hostile pilot's surprise was audible over the radio frequency. "Unknown aircraft, you're entering restricted airspace," the enemy leader transmitted. "Identify yourself immediately." Marcus smiled grimly as he switched to the base's emergency frequency. "Ramstein Control, this is Ghost Rider requesting immediate vector to hostile targets." The silence from a control tower was deafening. Ghost Rider had been officially dead for 12 years, his service record sealed, and his existence denied by 3 different military branches. Colonel Harrison's voice finally crackled through the static, barely controlled shock evident in his tone. Ghost Rider, how are you possible? Marcus banked hard left as the first enemy missile streaked past his canopy. Ghost Rider is taking the lead, he replied calmly. All ground units maintain cover. The enemy formation scattered as they realized they were no longer hunting helpless prey, but facing a predator who had just revealed himself. The first enemy fighter exploded in a cascade of metal and fire as Marcus's AIM-120 found its mark with surgical precision. The hostile formation leader screamed orders over the radio, his composed military bearing cracking under the realization that they faced a legendary pilot who had supposedly died over the Balkans. Ghost Rider was a myth, the enemy leader shouted. Intelligence confirmed his death 12 years ago. Marcus rolled inverted and dove through the formation's center, his maneuvers flowing like deadly poetry written in contrails and flame. Myths don't die, he replied over the open channel. They just learn to push mops. 2 more enemy aircraft fell to his guns in a display of aerial mastery that defied belief. The remaining hostile pilots found themselves outflown by tactics they had only heard whispered in classified briefings. Below on the base, ground personnel emerged from shelters to witness an impossible sight. Their quiet janitor was dismantling a superior enemy force with the cold efficiency of a master craftsman returning to his life's work. Colonel Harrison watched the tactical display in stunned silence as red enemy icons vanished one by one from his screen. The last 3 enemy fighters broke formation in desperate evasive maneuvers, their pilots abandoning coordinated tactics for individual survival. Marcus pursued them with relentless precision, his F-16 moving through the sky like an extension of his own body. The enemy leader made a final transmission before his aircraft disintegrated under Marcus's cannon fire. Command, this is Strike Leader. Mission compromised. Ghost Rider is real. Repeat, Ghost Rider is operational and engaging. The transmission ended in static and flame. Marcus banked toward the fleeing survivors, his targeting system locking onto the nearest hostile. The mathematics of aerial combat had shifted completely. What began as 12 professional military pilots executing a flawless attack had become a rout orchestrated by a single man who had spent 8 years pretending to be invisible. On the ground, base personnel stood transfixed as their humble janitor completed what an entire squadron of modern fighters could not accomplish. The final 2 enemy aircraft fell within seconds of each other, their wreckage scattered across the German countryside like broken promises of American defeat. Silence returned to the morning sky, broken only by the sound of Marcus's F-16 banking toward home. Marcus touched down on the damaged runway with the same gentle precision he had once used to land on aircraft carriers in rolling seas. The F-16's engines wound down to silence as emergency vehicles and personnel surrounded the aircraft, their faces reflecting a mixture of disbelief and awe. Colonel Harrison was the first to reach the cockpit as Marcus opened the canopy and removed his helmet. The janitor's uniform was still visible beneath the borrowed flight gear, a surreal reminder of the transformation they had all witnessed. Marcus Valdez, the colonel said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. Ghost Rider. Marcus climbed down from the aircraft with the same unhurried movements he used when emptying trash cans. But now every person on the base watched those movements with newfound respect. For 8 years, you mopped our floors, Colonel Harrison continued. You knew every classified briefing, every tactical discussion, every operational detail. Marcus nodded quietly. Someone had to keep the base clean, he replied simply. The crowd of airmen and officers stood in stunned silence, realizing they had worked alongside a legend who had chosen anonymity over glory, service over recognition. 3 months later, Marcus still arrived for the early morning shift, but now his janitor's uniform bore the silver eagles of a full colonel and the distinguished flying cross hung beside his base access badge. The mop and bucket remained, though younger airmen often volunteered to help the legendary pilot with his cleaning duties. Colonel Harrison had offered Marcus any position he wanted, from Squadron Command to Pentagon briefing rooms. But Marcus had declined them all. "I like the quiet work," he had explained. "It give me time to listen to the aircraft." The morning routine continued much as before, except now, when Marcus paused to identify engine signatures, junior officers gathered around to learn from the master. The base had been rebuilt stronger than ever, its defenses upgraded, and its personnel trained in tactics that Marcus shared from decades of classified missions. As he pushed his mop down the familiar corridor, Marcus smiled at the sound of F-22 engines warming up for morning exercises. Some Guardians wore wings and flew at supersonic speeds. Others wore janitor uniforms and protected their flocks with quiet vigilance and hidden strength. If you enjoyed this story of hidden courage, share your thoughts about your favorite moment, or tell us about someone you know who showed unexpected strength when it mattered most.